Shortly thereafter, Norman, who was 14, and 14 was the school-leaving age, came back to London, and so we were all together again, except my brother Toby, who had joined the Royal Air Force. I was home a short time, and the Blitz on London began. And I still clearly remember, we lived in this apartment, we were on the 4th floor, and you could see over to the east, the sky was red because the London docks were on fire. And London was on for 57 consecutive nights. Every night they came over. So, after spending the week in an air raid shelter, my mother said, "You do not know to stay here." So, back I go out again, back to Fordham. Now, my mother was not going to send me back to that family, even if they would have accepted me, for obvious reasons. So, we went to Fordham, and we got hold of the local billeting officer, a gentleman named Mr. Howard, I believe was a local lawyer, and he put us in his car and took us to a little house on the edge of town. This is the house sometime in the 1850s, 1860s. And this gentleman, one of these gentlemen is the builder of this house. I went to that house, and this picture was given to me by his grandson, his great-grandson. I'm not quite sure what he was. So we got out of the car, and we went to Sycamore Cottage, which was a little whitewashed house with a great big sycamore tree standing next to it, and green door, and the roof tiles had once been red, with this great big tree hanging over it, you know, the dripping of on the tiles, the roof was all green from the moss. And we walked up this garden path, a short garden path, and there was this huge fuchsia bush, purple fuchsia bush occupied most of the garden. It was a very small house, very small garden. So Mr. Howard, we went up to the door, and he knocked on the door, green door, and we waited. We waited, and we waited, and he knocked, and we waited, and then the door opened. You know, the squeak. The door opened, and I saw what I was convinced was a witch. I was terrified because there was a little lady came to the door. She was 4'10" perhaps, this big, and her hair was standing up, and she had no teeth, and her mouth was unclean. And I was getting ready to take off because I knew about witches, you know. So he said, "Hello, Miss Ada." He said, come in. So she said, "Sure, come in her country accent. And this was like going into a museum. We looked in, she had an oil lamp, kerosene lamp on gimbals, and on this side she had a harmonium, and the whole place was filled with bric-a-brac. Every horizontal surface had something on it. It was a real Victorian house. She had you know, guys know what antimacassars are? And antimacassars on the chairs. The sofa was the black horsehair stuff. It was like a museum. So I'm terrified, and I'm shaking. Anyway, we came in, and there were also these pictures of her long dead relatives, and these old pictures, these very stiff people looking down from us, these sepia faded pictures. It was a trip. So Mr. Howard explained to Miss Fleet that we needed some accommodations, me for some indeterminate time, and for Mum and Hetty for a few days. So she made us some tea, and she said, "I'd like to help you, but I have an evacuee. But he's not here, he's gone back to London for a few days, but you know, you can stay here until he comes back." Well, he never came back, and I stayed with Aunt Ada, as I learned to call her, for 4 years. And Mr. Howard left, and she showed us up to her bedroom. And the center, it was a very small house, the center of the room was occupied by one of these huge 4-post beds. A real 4-poster bed, you know, the canopy, the whole thing. And to me, a little kid, this was very high. And it was interesting that to get into the bed, you had to climb up these stairs. There was 3 steps. And it was very cunning that in the center step was a secret compartment. You opened it up, and inside is a chamber pot. And on this side is a commode. It's like a wooden box you lift it up to do whatever you have to do. And on one side she had this washstand with a pitcher, you know, one of these willow pattern things, a pitcher and a ewer to wash up. And there was also a chamber pot under the bed, but you know. So they even had an antique brass, one of these antique brass warming pans, these round things with a long handle on the wall. And she never used it, but it was there. I guess somebody had used it. I later found out the reason for her scary witch-like appearance when I first saw her. What had happened, it was the middle of the afternoon, she'd been having a nap, and so she'd lay down, her hair was messed up, she'd taken out her false teeth. She had these ceremonial false teeth, used them on high days and holidays. So she was scary, to me she was scary. But she wasn't a witch, she was a most loving person, and I was very, very fortunate to have met her, and I loved her, I really loved her very much. In fact, I stayed in touch with her until 1963 when I was living in this country when she passed away. Well, the first night there, the three of us slept in this four-poster bed. And there was two of us facing north and one facing south. I don't remember who was where, but I do remember that part. And now, I don't remember how long Mum and Hetty stayed with me, but eventually they had to go back. My brother and my father were still back in London, and they went back. And I walked to the station with them, and it was a couple-mile walk. And I came back and I cried my eyes out because, I was on my own, and I cried. Anyway, I cried myself to sleep that night, and many, many more nights thereafter. This is Aunt Ada. I think she was somewhere over 80, 81 perhaps. She was a dear. Very small, no bigger than this. My mother was only 5 foot tall, and my mother towered over her. She was a single lady, she'd never been married. She was what they called in England a spinster, and she had had a boyfriend as a young woman, but her father forbade her from marrying him, so she didn't marry him. She stayed single and she kept house for her father and mother till they died. She didn't have any money. Her only income was from renting the front room, so she must have had a very little income. Now this house, which was built somewhere about 1840, had no conveniences of any kind, period. Nothing. There was no running water, there was no plumbing, there was no electric, there was no gas, of course there was no phone, there was no toilet. It was a house, that was it. The outhouse was a pit toilet, a few steps down the garden path. And in that part of the country there's a lot of flint, and the old buildings are built of flint and chalk. And this outhouse was flint and chalk. And it was a one-holer. And our drinking water came from a spigot. The next door neighbor had a spigot in the yard, which was great because prior to that, before this thing was put in, they got the water from a well. These wishing well things with a roof. You throw pennies in here. Well, this wasn't a wishing well. It was a well. And, throw the bucket down and wind it up. So that was before my time, but it was still there. And so this was a great convenience when they had this pipe. So she'd get a bucket and she'd go over and fill the bucket with water and put it in the pantry. And when she needed water for whatever, she'd just dip it out into the teapot, whatever. She had a coal-burning stove. It was, they call it a range in England. A cast iron thing made yay big, burned coal, for cooking and for heating. That was the only heat. The illumination was supplied by a lamp, something like this. And this was also 2 burners, an oil lamp. Kerosene. It's called a paraffin lamp in England. Here it's called a, oil lamp. So that's how I learned to read, with a lamp like that. And at night time, to go up to bed, we'd light a candle, and we'd go upstairs and blow the candle out and get in bed. She wanted to hear the news. She'd go next door to Mr. Diver, next door neighbor. And Mr. Diver didn't have electricity either, but he had a radio that ran on wet cell batteries, which in England were, maybe still, called accumulators. They're a glass bottle and they have lead and acid in it, and it makes electricity. And you listen to the radio, and when the accumulator runs down, you take it to the petrol station. You couldn't buy any petrol. There was no petrol. You couldn't. But anyway, charged up the battery, and you listen to the radio. And the radio had an antenna that ran all the way down the garden. It was like a clothesline as far as the length of it. And we picked up the BBC and so forth. Now, after I'd been in the village for a few days, I started attending school, and most of my teachers were still there. And they gave us the village hall, the Victoria Hall, and all the kids were in one big room with, I guess, partitions, and it was very noisy and hectic because 5, 6 classes going on at the same time.